Okay, welcome to our 10th Veteran Lifelong Leaders Forum at Maryland Smith. Today's forum features Navy vet, investor philanthropist, and former Chief Financial Officer of GameStop, Jim Bell. Before we dive in, some quick admin items. First, our forum rules. Please mute your mics unless you're speaking. Send questions in chat or raise your hand virtually. Wait to be called on by a host or a speaker. Turn on your camera as able and let us know who you are before you start launching questions or thoughts. Also note that as referenced in the invitation, the session is recorded for post to platforms that allow access by Maryland students, alumni, and community partners after the event. So your participation from this point on implies consent to that recording. Second, a moment, as always, to honor our comrades who can't join us today because they're deployed, either in military service or as members of other uniformed services. Thanks. Okay, so a warm welcome to some special Maryland partners who have been invited today. If you're here, thanks to our relationship with the Alliance of Veterans affiliated with Big Ten Business Schools, 4Block, Corporate Gray, eMentor, or the Mid-Atlantic Veteran Business Outreach Center. We're thrilled to have you. Thanks for joining us. Next, some context for these events. Our Lifelong Leaders Fora are part of Maryland Smith's broader initiative for veteran lifelong leadership, through which we promote veterans as strategic assets for our united economy. So please reach out to me or somebody else on the veteran team if you're interested in learning more about any of those missions, platforms, or partners. So now to the forum. We hold these forum roughly once a semester as a way to explore together the role of lifelong leaders in our evolving nation and global economy. And we do that by asking our featured vet and asking each other questions like, what is a lifelong leader? Are there tactics, techniques, and procedures for lifelong leadership? And how do we become and promote each other as strategic assets for a united economy? And we featured vet business executives, entrepreneurs, advocates, authors, disruptors. And today we're honored to add to that list Jim. But just one last thing before Jim takes the controls. It's an exercise to get your game on and see what we all know about various facets of Jim's career. So we'll give you 1 minute to respond to a pop quiz, and then we'll review the answers together. No side tab Googling, please. Do this from what you know in your own non-electric head. It's not graded. Okay, I'm calling it. We've got 28 to 36 in. I'm sorry for anyone who didn't complete. We're going to end it, which should actually then share results. And let's see how we did. So question number one, what company produced the mighty US Navy P-3 Orion, the aircraft that Jim was a naval flight officer in for the early part of his career? They produced it from 1969 to 1990. And I'm proud to say that it's Lockheed Martin, actually a really long-time partner of Maryland Smith, in fact. And not bad, actually the majority, 43% hit that on the head. Question number two, so on average, veteran applicants are less likely to be recruited, but more likely to be hired in accounting, financial services, and consumer goods than their non-veteran peers. True or false? And the answer is false. In fact, in financial services, veterans are 21% more likely to have outreach from a recruiter, but then 49% less likely to be hired than non-veterans. In accounting, they're 30% more likely to be recruited, but then 62% less likely to be hired than non-veterans. And in consumer goods, it's a whopping 149% more likely that veterans are going to hear from a recruiter, but 35% less likely that that's going to convert into a job offer. So Jim is a rarity in the field. He beat the odds in all three, at sort of the intersection of all three industries. Question three, which of the following brands are corporate divisions of Gap Incorporated? And actually, yeah, not many people hit all of them. So they are all part of the same conglomerate at this point, which actually I learned. I didn't know that Athleta was owned by Gap. So I learned something new in the research as well. Question four, so Coldwater Creek, where Jim also worked as a financial executive. Was launched in 1994 as a catalog-based direct mail clothing retailer by Dennis and Ann Pence in New York, actually out of their New York apartment, with $40,000 of their own savings. And 13 years later at IPO, its valuation was $37.5 million. So they did handsomely well in 13 years. Question 5, what does the PF and PF Chang's stand for? And it does not stand for Peking Funk, which actually is a really popular CD apparently, but it does stand for co-founder of the restaurant, Paul Fleming. Finally, question 6, actually second to finally, Harry and David LLC found as Bear Creek Orchards in 1910, renamed with founders Harry and David Holmes. Pioneered just-in-time premium fruit home delivery in America. And in 2014, it was acquired by 1-800-Flowers.com. Final question. On January 4th, 2021, first day of New Year's trading, shares in GameStop stock, that's hard to say, closed at $17.24 a share. That was actually up from just a few days prior at $13 a share. On January 27th, so just 27 days later, it would close at a record high of $347.51 a share. And just as an addendum to that, actually the share price today, I looked it up, is 114.87. So still well over the 17.24 a share, but slightly down from that 365-day peak. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. And thanks for your participation. Now for the intro we all came for. Jim Bell is by many standards really a remarkable veteran and lifelong leader. His career started at the U.S. Naval Academy, from which he became a naval flight officer, leading aviation missions worldwide in that mighty P-3 Orion. He returned to Annapolis as a leadership instructor and coach, also earning a working professional MBA at Maryland Smith on the side. And he pivoted from there into corporate finance, leading in a series of iconic American retailers, including The Gap, Harry and David, Coldwater Creek, and P.F. Chang's, all of which you know a little bit more about. And then finally serving as most recently CFO of GameStop until just last year to focus on investing, philanthropy, and service to others. Now, he joins us today from Spokane, Washington, but he resides normally in Texas. So Jim, thanks for joining us. We're ready to hear more about your journey in leadership and what you've learned along the way.
Thanks so much, Frank. And thanks everybody for joining. I appreciate you having me. Always a great pleasure to meet and engage with other veterans and those that support other veterans in what we're doing in the world, either on active duty or in the pursuit of education or pursuit of our professional lives. So I think it's a fantastic community, one that I've been very, very close with and very, very fortunate to have in my life throughout my time exiting the Naval Academy. And so as Frank shared a little bit of my background, he's asked me to maybe fill in a little bit more of those details and share with you some of my journey. And so let me give you a little bit more of that background, and then I'll spend some time. I wanted to share some of those important elements that I took with me from my military career. And then maybe as I transitioned after just under 10 years on active duty into the private sector, what did I experience that maybe a military career, or at least a short one, didn't prepare me for? And so I have a few thoughts I want to share with you on that. So as Frank mentioned, I graduated the Naval Academy with an economics degree in 1989, headed out to flight school, became a naval flight officer, and went out to Barbers Point, Hawaii, and flew in the P-3 community. Had completed 3 full deployments throughout Asia Pac, Middle East, and Africa. It's during the first Gulf War era, Somalia, and some other things that we had in terms of some of the great work that ourselves and our teammates were doing. In addition to leading flight crew ops as mission commander on the P-3, also served as a training officer, that was assistant ops, and then finally the ops officer before I left the squadron. So I went back to the Naval Academy for my final active duty tour. Had a fantastic opportunity to get in the classroom a little bit with midshipmen. It was an unbelievable time. I was also working in the athletic department as administrator and a baseball coach, but it also gave me an opportunity to attend University of Maryland. And one of the big reasons I went that way in terms of the Naval Academy in Maryland, and I had applied to a number of different schools, it was a great combination for me to continue to explore my goal of transitioning from active duty, to pursue this goal that I had in corporate finance, but I wasn't really quite sure exactly what I wanted to do. So that's where Maryland comes in. The Smith School was an amazing opportunity for me to really grow that knowledge base, a more current knowledge base of the financial markets, corporate strategy, execution, all those things that it takes to run businesses. But it also helped me refine my direction and specific goals more, and really refine what did I want to do in terms of my career in the world of finance after having spent, like I said, about the previous 9.5 years on active duty. So I finished B school late in 97, transitioned off active duty in 98, middle of 98. My first stop was as an investment banker at Piper Jaffray for a couple of years. Absolutely fantastic experience, added my leadership skills. But most importantly, what it did for me was give me, in my late 20s, early 30s, a time where I could really build my financial skill set in a world where it was sort of intense and a lot of deal making and the like. And it really gave me the ability to advance quickly, where my peers had been in that space for 10 years prior. And so that was a really, really great thing for me to take on and make that transition. But I realized one big thing. In the client service business, you don't have as much opportunity, at least I didn't see it, that to really build and develop and create teams and lead operational activities. And there's a lot that goes into that you don't necessarily see in the client sector business. So I took an opportunity to be a CFO at a technology startup for a couple of years. Incredible fun in the middle of Silicon Valley. But we sold that business a couple of years later, began a long career in retail and consumer products. That's when I went to the Gap. Absolutely fell in love with this space. I love the puzzle, not only the activity that we do in terms of leading people, but I love the puzzle that therein is the consumer. Consumers are very fickle, and to be in their head and frankly, in their pocketbook is an incredibly difficult challenge. But it's an amazing one, and one that if you get it right, it's really, really amazing. You build great relationships with those consumers. So, as Frank said, the Gap, Harry and David, Coldwater Creek, PF Chang's, and most recently GameStop, and we'll share a little bit more on that last one in particular a little bit later. But this was really, as I found my way into the consumer space, it was really the ultimate place where I could combine the notion of several things that I'd learned previously in my career. One, strategic planning with operational execution. I've been doing that a long time, including all of my time in the military. But then really help organizations execute the strategy, but also help them understand the optimum financial outcomes. And it's really interesting to see a lot of operational folks in business who aren't able to quite create the connective tissue to the financial outcomes. And having really, really strong financial partners that can bounce from operations to financial execution is what I found to be an incredibly big added value to companies. And then most importantly, I think, really at the center of the work, and this is no surprise, is the ability to develop, influence, support, and lead people, and really bring them all together to meet this puzzle that are the company's objectives. And so to kind of go back to what Frank asked me to talk about, I'm going to share one thing that's, kind of interesting. I think what I took with me when I left the military, one thing really resonated. I've thought a lot about it in the last 25 years almost since I've been out. In the military, regardless of your service or basic training, whatever you've done to enter the military, in some form or fashion, we were all stripped down and built back up again. And it was based around that core central understanding of the mission. And that's mixed with our innate sense of service to our country. And it really creates this amazing fighting force that I think we've all experienced, those of you that are veterans and those of you that are close to it, that this really 2020 vision to this central mission. And it's based on that passion to serve. We rely on each other for that premise, and it's present, but it also gives us the ability to then turn and really focus on the critical element of execution, efficient and effective operations of the military mission. In particular, especially when you're starting to talk about coordinated ops, international coordinated ops, and I know that's well, I won't comment on the current environment, but obviously it's a challenging environment, but all of those things were really important for us to rely on. However, I propose to you that I don't think there's really such a thing like that in the civilian sector. And I think, frankly, I talk to a lot of people about that transition being difficult and that we miss that camaraderie. I would propose to you that I think that that's what that camaraderie is based on, that common essence of that sense of passion and duty, and that knowledge that we all have and rely on in each other. And it really creates this amazing environment. So, I think, again, but I missed it. I missed it early on when I made that transition to the private sector. But what I learned early on is, what does it really mean? It means that as a leader, we just have to adapt our approach. And what I mean by that is we have to really before you're going into focus on best in class execution, you have to go back to that other core thing, which is you have to create and establish a very strong culture. One that we relied on as military members, but a lot of times you have to build that inside organizations. And so I really had to think back, sit back, adapt, learn how to begin this process of understanding deeper motivations, wants, desires of each of our teammates, and then begin that process to understand how each individual fits within this overall organizational puzzle. And frankly, it's not a one-time evolution, right? It's a constantly evolving thing and a constant endeavor. It requires, in my opinion, it required a lot of time and energy and passion. And it was wonderful and very satiating, but it made me think differently. And it wasn't something that I really took with me from the military necessarily in the application of running private business. But what I did also find is that it was natural for me to lean back and leverage this idea of a passion for service, but it became really servant leadership. And I think you have that in the military in a lot of ways, and each of us played different roles. Pardon me. But it was very different because it had to come with really this authenticity of the individual at each and every level of the organization. And it was, frankly, an exponential amount of individual motivations, especially when in some of my organizations, and I'll use GameStop as the most recent one, tens of thousands of employees, almost 50,000 employees globally in 14 countries, operating at the time, about 7,000 stores. And so you have this entire amazing set of employee base across numerous countries and cultures. And so at the center of that really is this idea that there's an authentic empathy that comes with that servant leader mindset. And I think that is the easiest way for me to say how important that is, because when you make that authentic connection through that empathy with individuals as leaders, it really builds a strong bond, not only for yourself, but also within that overall culture. And employees want to be part of that. I've talked with thousands and thousands of people over the years that's really what they come down to and say, hey, my boss is concerned with me. That's a great leader. I love that. Or the alternative, which is the unfortunate. We all know these stats, but what's the number one reason people leave? It's for a role. It's because of their boss. And so that's how important this is. What I loved about that is when people would tell me, when they give you little inklings like, hey, I am super excited to get up in the morning and go to work. That's an interesting thing, right? It's the live to work kind of balance thing. But when people are excited, they're doing something they love and they love being there. That's really what I'm trying to get to. We had that in an innate sense in the military, and I didn't find that innately in businesses, but we had to create it. So then kind of pivot a little bit outside of that, there were certain things that I really did take with me. And I thought they were amazingly applicable that I learned during my time as a Navy officer. And that was, I think, first of all, it's something, it's not new. These things are not new. These aren't new propositions. But for me, that idea that every leader has to own their responsibility set. That's, again, not a new endeavor. In fact, I think, a couple of our former colleagues, Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, they put it together in their Extreme Ownership book. They did a fantastic job unwrapping this point in the book. And it's very true. This idea of ownership is for a leader is critical. But what's also interesting is, and I'll go back to that, just using Willink and Babin as an example, I found it interesting. They had to come back and write another book called The Dichotomy of Leadership, because they were getting all this feedback from the civilian world. People were taking them very literally. And they didn't realize, wait a minute, this ownership thing's important, but it doesn't mean that you aren't having to balance it with the idea that I need to delegate responsibilities, right? And at the same time, I balance it with staying away from micromanaging people, which is a complete detractor of culture. And so, and in fact, micromanagement is likely one of the fastest attributes to negatively impact team culture. And so finding this balance of how do I create accountability? I'm an owner of my responsibility set. I'm delegating my team. I'm motivating them to do their thing. But at the same time, I'm also balancing this notion of micromanagement, which is so negative. And I love this saying. I think it wraps it up for me. You can delegate responsibility, but you can't delegate accountability. And to me, that's something I heard as a plebe at the Naval Academy. Frank, you'll appreciate this, as sort of freshman 101 leadership class up in Lewis Hall. But it's so true, and it resonated with me and still does to this day. The second attribute I'd share with you from my military days is again, not unique, but never underestimate the power of humility, right? There's simply no room for arrogance. I think it's particularly true in corporate America today. And I'll tell you why I think so. I've seen a lot of it coming out of the tech sector in particular, but tech or tech-enabled sectors. There's this notion of this amazing, very rapid wealth creation that happens. And it's a really interesting thing. But as leaders, it's so important for us to understand and practice the difference between confidence and arrogance. There's a huge difference. And to me, that's that notion of where humility comes in, and the fact that ego and arrogance are really factors that will quickly erode all that work you do to create great culture. And finally, I think the last idea I'd share is that was really important so far in my career, and I think will continue to be, is, and I speak to this actually a good bit in some of the times that I spend speaking, particularly around leadership classes, both at the collegiate level and the high school level. And there's some of the things I'm doing these days. And it's this idea that I really didn't understand the power of curiosity in leadership. And particularly that idea that we can very effectively engage team members with this notion of an authentic, curious nature. So you can ask a lot of questions, but if you're authentically listening to those responses with an objective to learn, it can be an incredibly powerful engagement, again, to create culture. Especially when those responses are counter to what your current point of view is. And so if we just take a pause and kind of a sidebar, if we think about this, it's really using this Socratic method that not only do you gain insight from the response as someone who's leading a business, it also gives the responder the ability to frame and own their own responses, which is an incredibly powerful thing for that culture. right? That idea of culture and sort of one mission, one goal, et cetera. So that's really, I mean, these were the essence elements as Frank asked me to put together some thoughts that I wanted to share, and hopefully they helped you learn a little bit about me and how some of the things that I extensively leveraged throughout my almost 25 years in the private sector following my time in the military. So I know we have a couple of questions. We have some time here, I think. So why don't we pivot, open it up to some questions, and really we can explore any of these concepts further if you like, or, you know, frankly, we can talk about anything that's on your mind. And by the way, that includes some of the GameStop stuff. That's kind of fun stuff, and I'd be happy to share whatever I can. So, so let me just transition. Frank, do we have anybody teed up for any questions?
Yeah, that's terrific. Thanks, Jim, and really great insights. So I would like to open it up first to questions from those who pre-submitted questions with their registration. We actually had 4 pre-submitted questions. So the first one is from Winnie Jean, who is a Smith student. And Winnie, are you with us, and would you like to ask your question? Okay. Winnie may not have been able to join here, so I will go ahead and ask a question. So she asked, how did you design your career in retail finance as you launched it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And as I said, it really started out, I knew I wanted to work in the world of corporate finance. I had some great internships when I was at the Naval Academy on Wall Street and in the economic affairs for government economic affairs in the Pentagon. But I didn't really know where. And that's where Maryland really helped me going to the Smith School and creating a little bit more focus. But once I got into the space and really started getting into retail finance, I started really designing my career about around this idea that, you know, hopefully I could add value to organizations by this merriment of, you know, I spent a lot of time on strategic execution, definition and execution, and the merriment of that with the world of corporate finance. And it really created, that's where a lot of CFO roles have become. They've moved, look, the accounting stuff's important. It's a minimum price of entry, but you have to be able to execute strategically and have a different type of vision, particularly one that speaks to and it gives clear visibility of the financial outcomes. And that's how I tried to design my pathway.
Thanks. The second question actually, and you kind of alluded to it in your first question, actually comes from Cleveland Eason. So Cleve is actually a classmate from my own MBA cohort and a Navy vet also. So Cleveland, are you with us? You want to ask your question?
Yes, I'm here, and not sure what's going on with the video, but I did try to turn it on. But basically, my question was, yeah, I guess for me, I got my low bandwidth going on here. But either way, my question had to do with, you are an aviator, and I definitely work with a lot of aviators. But did you have a finance emphasis when you're at the Naval Academy? I know there's a lot of work that you do as a flight engineer. It has to do with numbers and calculations with fuel and weight. But how did you get into was it just through the Smith School experience that led you into finance?
So my undergrad is a great question, Cleve. Thanks a lot. And it was my undergraduate degree is in economics. And like I said, it's the thing that I was able to do a couple of really, really fun internships I mentioned a second ago, and those were really important to me. But as I started to explore further and knew that I had this sort of bitten by this finance bug, and I went through my time in the squadrons and back at the academy, really, that's where Maryland came in and Smith School came in, and the ability to really understand that more, refine that effort. And what I realized is this idea that, yes, there's an accounting thing, and I don't have an accounting background, I'm not a CPA. So I had to really bolster that knowledge base early on. And I spent a lot of time in that arena. I'm not a CPA. But that in these roles is a minimum price of entry. And so I had to spend the time and really put in the effort and frankly, teach myself on, if you will, build on some of the foundations that I took away from Smith School, but also really on the job training. And I was able to really garner the knowledge base and then wrap around that idea of the strategic finance and corporate finance elements.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the next question is from Dan Eberhardt. And I know, Dan, are you here? I don't see you in the audience. So I'll give you a second to chime in if you are here. Okay. Well, Dan also is a Smith student, current Smith student. So he asked, how did the GameStop finance team react to the recent stock volatility, and what did you learn from that experience?
I learned an amazing amount from the GameStop experience, for sure. And this is a great question, because this was a pressure point that was really, really important from a leadership standpoint at that organization, which was what was going on in the stock market had nothing to do with the company, but it was a massive distraction, as you might expect. And so what we really had to do day in and day out is keep our teams focused on the execution of the business. We were in the middle of a turnaround, and I knew that going into this business, the GameStop business was and is still executing on a turnaround. And we had to really keep the organization focused. And so our reactions were to be very open and transparent, but really focus the team day in and day out on being able to execute. And they did amazingly well. As an example, all this stuff is going on or the year before we're heading into 2020, in the early part of that year, the teams were executing. We put over $500 million in cash on the balance sheet, really out of mining better efficient operations in terms of working capital. And it allowed us to navigate the pandemic. And then we go into the fall and ultimately into the outline that you gave earlier, Frank, and this crazy stock ride. So it was really about keeping the organization focused. And that's a trying concept from a leadership standpoint, particularly, by the way, we're in the middle of a pandemic as well. And so we're closing stores in 14 countries around the world and trying to balance the execution of that all at the same time. So that's a great learning and an engagement for employees.
Can I ask you to dive a little bit more into that in terms of how did you do that? How did you keep them focused? Was it on video calls? Were you, obviously it's remote. You're trying to keep people focused when they can't meet in person. How did you work through that?
Yeah, it was really that we had to set up a very, very consistent set of calls that we had. They were video calls always. We really, really stressed that endeavor that we're engaging on the video function. If you recall, if you go back, look, it's amazing what this pandemic really brought on. I think we all know this, but this technology has been around a long time, and it wasn't really in use like it was, like we put it to use in the last 2 years. So utilizing technology, having very, very disciplined processes were huge parts of that equation, Frank. And when you're global business, sometimes it's in the middle of the night in the US, and that's okay. It's the investment that you have to put in to lead those businesses. And frankly, I think that's that leadership by example thing that's so important.
Yeah, right, thanks. The final question pre-submitted that we had is from Jai Salters. Are you with us? May not have been able to come sometime. Okay, and she asks, what is the role in your mind of passion in service after the military?
Yeah, I think I talked a lot about, I alluded to this or talked directly to it. I think it was an incredibly important aspect as we have a different foundation in the military, and using that passion of service, that idea about service to our country and turning it into a servant leadership construct inside the civilian world is an incredibly important aspect for me.
Great, thanks. So now, actually, we've got about 15 minutes for open dialogue. So I see we've got a couple of hands up. So Jeremy, could you moderate the
Yeah, absolutely. So Jared DM'd me. We'll start with Jared and then go to Ihuoma and then Jacob.
All right, excellent. Good afternoon. Once again, I'm Jared Bogdan, first year MBA student. So in my military experience so far, I'm used to working in small teams and having more control over the culture on a small scale. So when you move from your military experience and you go all the way up and you're in a large international organization like GameStop, how does small team, your ability to affect change in culture on small teams translate to a global international scale? Or do you have to change your approach?
It's excellent. You know what? And the short answer is no, you don't change your approach, but you really understand, it's a fantastically insightful question. You have to understand the power of that notion that I spoke about earlier, the ability to delegate. Have that constant and consistency in the message points, in the expectations, in the ability to hold an organization accountable, but also really, really rely on the notion of leadership throughout the organization, throughout the structure of the organization, and delegate those authorities. It's incredibly important. It can be very powerful if you really understand the ability to give them vision and drive that message, that tone and tenor all the way down through the organization.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Ihuoma, if you can introduce yourself and ask your question.
Okay. Hi, good evening, and thank you so much for everything you said. So my name is Ihuoma, and I left, I graduated from the MBA program last year. I'm a physician by training. I work as a chief medical officer. And my question is, so sometimes you have these situations at work where there's a lot going on. And I often hear people say things like, let's just target the low-hanging fruit. There's a quick win. And it kind of drives me nuts. I hate to hear it. I feel like it's a lazy man's way out, but I also understand the practicality of that. So my question is, how do you balance that, trying to get a quick win, maybe, I don't know, maybe just to raise morale, with the fact that many times people, you see a system-wide problem and that a piecemeal approach is just not going to do it. How do you balance trying to keep the morale up with just doing what is the best way to go forward? Are there little things that make you decide which way to lean?
This is, again, another incredibly insightful question. And for me, particularly having had the opportunity two or three times to join on the executive team of a business, particularly publicly traded businesses that are in the eye of the public domain for quarterly results, that there's this pressure point of delivering on these short-term results, but you have to achieve the long-term objectives. And I've found that it requires a very, very, again, consistent, but a very active discussion of inside the organization of here's our objective, but not just here's our objectives, here's why. Let's walk through the pathway of why we're doing it this way. And oh, by the way, in the interim, we should expect to hit certain milestones. And you're not just setting it once, set it and forget it. I found that I had to put a lot of energy, and I loved that energy in that time that I did it, to put into that constant conversation on those points. And really that, I don't want to say reassurance, but again, that idea that these are long-term objectives. And it is, again, you're under a lot of pressure, particularly in the public domain. But you have to be transparent and authentic in your communication. And I'll share with you, it's even important because a lot of employees hear what's said in that public domain, in particular with your quarterly earnings calls. And so you have to manage Wall Street just as the same as the employee base. And what I found is it's incredibly important to spend a lot of time with analysts on Wall Street, the sell side and buy side analysts, and clearly articulate, listen, this is not going to happen tomorrow, but here's what it's going to be on the long term. And more importantly, here's how we go from A to B. And here's what you're going to see along that pathway. And that constant, consistent dialogue is the thing that I found helped really create clarity. But you're absolutely right. It drives me nuts as well. But wait a minute, we need to put up, 3% on the quarter, or we're going to get stock prices going to get killed. Well, yeah, maybe, but that's not the objective. The objective is, here's what's happening in the quarter that we wanted to see happen, that helped us meet that are helping us meet the long-term objectives that we've laid out for you many times in the past, just to role play that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'd like to jump in with a question off of that, which is the inverse. So what, I imagine at GameStop, people were achieving results that they never anticipated, even faster than they thought they would come at one point. So can you talk about the inverse, where maybe you have to slow people down or get them to realize that the wins that may be coming at them, may need to be digested with a little bit more humility than.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because we have this specter of the stock, which had really, there were some really nice underpinnings in the evaluation of the stock that moved it, call it from $5 when I joined, upwards of about almost high 20s roughly, that were based on really, really fundamental delivery of wins. And I could go through this, but it's not important. And then on top of that, I mean, you talked about it. At one point, it was over $400 in that day that you were referring to back in January a year ago. So to get back to the question, it's really about when those wins come, celebrate them, but again, constantly keep the teams focused on ultimately the long-term objectives. And in some cases, keep their eyes away from the stock market, these distractions that are going on. And really, again, my answer is going to be the same, Frank. It really is. And you're hearing a theme of the phrase constant and consistent.
All right, Jacob.
Hey, how's it going, Jim? Thanks for giving us your time tonight. Yeah, I'm Jacob, second year MBA here at UMD. Recently watched the Carl Icahn doc on HBO. Highly recommend it if you haven't checked it out yet. But it really got me thinking about, activist investors and stuff like that. I know Michael Berry had a significant position in GameStop before the whole meme madness and everything. I just didn't know, as a CFO, either at GameStop or as an executive anywhere else that you've been, if you've ever had to deal with activist investor or proxy fights or anything like that, and maybe how you had to, navigate that.
Yeah, great question. Couple times. And I will tell you, having Michael Berry as a shareholder, I will just tell you, I'll comment on that. He's a great guy, super smart guy, and just wicked smart. Really, really, really like Michael a lot. But there's there's always going to be a point of view, right? And I think this is this notion that I almost talked about in terms of curiosity, where you're going to have, Jacob, a series of shareholders. They all have different views, right? And you have to be open and listen and hear and articulate the whys and wherefores of the direction and the strategy. If you're confident in those strategies, then you should be able to get activists confident in what you're saying. They're only activists if they have a different objective, frankly. That's the definition of activism. So there's not a whole lot I can tell you about how to deal with it, because they're all a little bit different, but they have investment objectives. And I think what I'd share with you is it's important to listen. It's important to listen intently about why they're saying what they're saying, why they're challenging what the management team is trying to do or the board is trying to do, and really understand and contemplate it and be open-minded, to listen and really understand.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. By the way, doesn't mean you're always going to agree. So it is what it is.
I will add that Jake is finance as well, and he's going to Goldman Sachs.
Fantastic.
Spending other people's money.
I've got a quick question if nobody else is raising their hand. So obviously we all came to Maryland to develop skills, transition our lives, kind of channel that inner drive that we have. Seeing you, who navigated the waters of a global pandemic while also dealing with probably the most insane stock market fluctuations we've seen in 40 years, what skills did Maryland provide to you that you found you leaned on to get through that? And for all of us here who graduated from Maryland or are going to graduate from Maryland, what should we be looking out for to draw on through our MBA experience?
Yeah, good question. It's unequivocally the emotional quotient. Again, do not minimize the idea and how powerful having a strong EQ really is. And the ability, because there's stuff flying at you, there's pressure points, you have to deliver on the results. We talked about that earlier. You've got, in one side, you've got activists coming, and stirring the pot. You've got this crazy meme stock stuff going on. And all at the same time, you're trying to execute a turnaround. And oh, by the way, you're finding out that you're closing all of Australia for a couple of weeks tomorrow, or all of Europe is going to close down for the next 6 weeks, or Italy, or what have you. So there's this constant flow. And so the thing is that you have to, I'd say both Maryland and my time in the military, certainly as an aviator, and the activities that I undertook in that endeavor were incredibly foundational for me to develop an EQ that really says, hey, you know what, there's all this pressure point to stay the course. I used to tell people at the Gap, look, man, nobody's shooting at us. We're just selling jeans, and it's really about using that, keeping that perspective. That's incredibly important.
I'll chime in with a question real quick, and then I know Scott, you want to go, and then I'll ask my next.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, I can go, Frank. Hi, Jim. Scott McGilver here, first year MBA student. Thanks for spending the time with us tonight. So my question is, you talked a lot about active listening as a leader. I'm just wondering, how do you establish a culture within a company that allows for open and honest feedback up the chain of command or up the leadership chain?
You know what? It's by example, Scott. If you're receiving feedback and people are visualizing and observing the reception of that feedback and the open-mindedness to really take it in, it doesn't mean you're going to change what you're doing, and maybe you do, maybe you don't, but it's really all in the example. I don't want to simplify it, but it really is, in my opinion, all in the example about truly being open-minded. If you want to ask a question or you want to ask for feedback, you need to actively listen, but at the same time, you have to be prepared to receive the feedback. And I know that, and I'm not trying to simplify it or give you a book response, but it really is that. It's not as easy as I'm making it sound, definitely. It's not. But again, if you're relying on the ability to be humble and that notion of humility, you can be open to take any sort of feedback, because it's not about you. Right? It really isn't about you. It's about, you're just one of the many people who are putting these activities together. Right? And a lot of times you're just trying to guide it.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. God, these are awesome questions.
Frank, do you want to hop in with yours, or should I let Darshan go?
Darshan.
Darshan, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Frank. And Jim, thank you so much for being here this evening. I'm Darshan Karat. I'm a second year, like a lot of these guys. My question is kind of building off of Scott's. So mine's kind of like the flip side of that same coin. I know, like in our leadership classes, they have an emphasis on not being myopic, about being top down. But what about the possible overcorrection of giving people so much space where, when you probably know that, having considered all the perspectives, but your idea is in fact right? Is there like a diplomatic way to balance both those things, to have that space, but also be like, all right, I appreciate your feedback, but I'm calling the play and here's what we're doing?
Yeah. And that's where I think really this idea, I talked about that notion of Socratic method, and the ability to say, hey, okay, well, tell me why you're saying that, for example, just kind of role play it for you. And it's the ability to when that gets articulated back from the responder, they're owning that response in a way that you get to say, okay, well, let's talk about how that might fit in. Where does that happen? Well, what about these potential outcomes? And you're having that good dialogue. But what you're also doing is you're establishing the notion that says, okay, that's great. However, now I'm going to take the time and we're going to make a decision. But I'm not just going to make the decision. I'm going to tell you why I'm doing it. Okay. Great feedback on what you just said. However, here's an alternative point of view. Let's go see what happens. Now, if you go fast forward that, let's say that leader's decision wasn't necessarily the right path. That leader is truly standing up and owning that decision, the responsibility, that accountability of being the leader. That's an incredibly important aspect. Now, the other side of that's even more important. When are you giving the praise to somebody who's putting that input in? Because you're not taking it as a leader. Absolutely, right? I mean, you're really truly understanding where the pieces of that team are executing and making sure that they understand how important they are in the evolution of that decision and how that input was so important to the execution. So I think for me, it's balancing both of those. But that method to me has been really, really helpful because it really engages folks a lot.
I'll ask a question as we get towards the end here. Do you have an example? You've worked for so many different companies, you know, a lot of them very different in different phases sort of their growth or turnaround or transformation. You know, do you have an example of two very different cultures that you encountered and how you had to kind of maybe adjust your approach or you know, or learn, you know, different approaches to deal with that?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I've got there's a great thing that comes to mind, and that is when I made the transition. So I left the military, went into investment banking, and then I did a couple years stint in the tech space. There's a lot of similarities in terms of speed and sharpness and directives and all the things that go along with those businesses. And then I went into the Gap where we're making jeans and fashion. And it is an entirely different scenario. And it really, really does test your ability to say, hey, wait a minute. Wow, culturally, this is different. I have to adapt, right? I just simply can't stay the course from a binary perspective. I'll give you here's a quick example. I remember this vividly, and I always will remember it because it was such a great learning for me. I was a relatively new person leading a finance organization for one of the divisions at the Gap. We had a merchant team that were creating some new fashion products, sort of, it was in the early days of the starting of fast fashion, the early Zara days, way back when. And, you know, we just couldn't make the math work. So these are big investments. These are multi-million-dollar investments to go make product that's unproven. And, you know, we just couldn't make the math work. And the merchants were really, really adamant about it. And I was overridden by the president of the division, of course, and she made the final call. And I was completely wrong. It was amazingly, incredibly well received in the marketplace. And I was totally wrong because I was trying to fit my binary world. I wanted to fit the financial analysis in to make the decision without understanding truly, it really was about the consumer. And there's an idea of the fashion side of the business and the merchandising team and what they really understood about these consumers. And I didn't put that into my bag of tricks. And I didn't have the experience to, but I really learned a lot from it.
That's great. Thanks, Jim. So sorry to take the last question. That actually concludes our time for the forum. Jim, you've been incredible, really, and the questions were incredible. It was really a great exchange. So thank you. You know, a modest token of our appreciation will be heading your way by mail. I hope you like turtles. Right? You can never have enough turtle in your life.
You never have enough turtle.
The recordings for this event and other events in our initiative for veteran lifelong leadership will be posted to our website along with announcements for upcoming events. So keep up with us there. You can see the URL at the bottom of that screen. I also encourage you to stay connected with us through LinkedIn. Members of the Smith Vet community can join our Smith Vets group. Big Ten vets can join our Big Ten group. And anyone, of course, is welcome to follow our initiative page. And finally, as always, I like to sign off with a salute to the Old Line legacy that all vets affiliated with Maryland share, and partners as well. It's a legacy that was born August 1776 at the Battle of Brooklyn, when less than 400 Maryland volunteer citizen soldiers held off more than 2,000 British Army regulars to save the Continental Army from a very early defeat. Less than a dozen of those 400 survived uninjured, but George Washington, who watched from a nearby hill, affectionately nicknamed them his Old Line, and he used their story of sacrifice to rally troops and patriots throughout the war. 19th century historian Thomas Field would later call the battle an hour more precious to American liberty than any other. And it's actually why Maryland is called the Old Line State. So thank you all for sharing a precious hour with us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Jim, on behalf of the student veteran population here, these Zoom things are kind of weird. We just click our leave button and then we disappear. But thank you so much for investing your time in us. We are incredibly grateful. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Let me just say, folks, it's absolutely my pleasure. I appreciate the invite. I'm humbled and honored by it. And you know, as we talked about servant leadership, let me just say, if ever I can be of a resource for any of you, and you know, I love these relationships, please ping me. I'm out there on LinkedIn, and hopefully we can help each other out. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. Good night.
Take care.
Thank you. Good night.